What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. Now, if y'all played way back in the day, Edge Transit used to be a meme and lovely weapon back when it was dropping from literally every single thing you went through. It was so obnoxious, but we got the new and a better version of the Edge Transit with these golden shiny brave weapons, and the Indomitability perk on this thing absolutely juices bosses with its damage. We got some pretty fun perks for both PvE, PvP, definitely more of a PvE weapon, but we are going to go over both of those god rolls for you guys right here. So first off, we got that Indomitability, which is one of my favorite origin perks that they have come out with. Those final blows grant us grenade energy when we are on our arc, solar, or void subclasses, or melee energy when we are on our stasis or darkness subclasses. So it allows us to have some beautiful ability spam inside of the PvE realm. And with the final shape and that prismatic subclass coming out, I think Indomitability is going to be a beautiful essential perk, if you will, for when that comes out. So starting us out PvE wise, where it definitely shines heavy right now, boss spec increases that damage against bosses and vehicles. We're getting that 8% damage increase against those mini bosses, which in Onslaught, very super nice to have. And then also obviously when we are juicing the damage in dungeons or in raids, this boss spec is super clutch for that. Next, right here we got our masterwork. Now this may be a little bit of a controversy to some people, but I personally think masterwork with the velocity is the best to have, because blast radius, when we are using this, we're trying to hit right on the enemy as well with spike grenades, so blast radius isn't doing too much. Plus with the perks, we're only getting it up about 10 on blast radius with the other perks that we can have on it. So I want to be able to put out as many grenades as possible, so that's why I like the velocity. In the first column, we can go two different ways. Like I said, build this out if you want for higher blast radius. I personally like the velocity a little bit more, so that's why I went with linear compensator. We get 5 to velocity, 5 to blast radius. It's kind of the middle of the road, but we got a couple different options as well, which is totally up to you. The second option is this volatile launch, gives us plus 15 to blast radius with minus 5 in velocity, so we are still at 37 with velocity, but all the way up to 65 with our blast radius, instead of being at 55 in blast radius with that little bit of extra in the velocity at 42. So it's just a little negligible stat wise at that point, in my opinion, but totally up to you. Now, most people will definitely say spike grenades is the best, and I do believe I would agree. We get that 12.5% increase on direct hits with our heavy grenade launchers, which does help make this thing absolutely juice the bosses. So with this and boss spec, we're doing 20% increase damage against those bosses and mini bosses on direct impacts. So it is definitely the best perk, I think, for overall in this slot. But like I said, we got that sneaky velocity perk to throw out even more of these, in my personal opinion. That sneaky little magazine is high velocity rounds, 10 velocity, 10 reloads, so you can reload faster, have faster velocity. So it is a beautiful little combination, in my opinion. Sleeper perk, just in my opinion, for this in magazines. Now when we move on to the PvE side, for the third column, we got Repulsor Brace, definitely for the Void synergy, giving us that volatile overshield, that 45 HP when we defeat those volatile targets, or I should say void debuffed targets, so it could also be weakened. But Repulsor, definitely my third option for this slot. On to option number 2 is Field Prep. Increased ammo reserves, faster reload, stow, and ready when crouching. So this thing right here, when it is procced, Field Prep is, I think, the fastest reload overall when it is actually being used correctly. So this thing allows you to put out some pretty pretty crazy fast damage on those bosses, like I said, when you are reloading. But our next perk is definitely the #1 choice and the S tier option. That perk is of course, Envious Assassin. We got defeating those targets with other weapons before drawing. This one transfers ammo to the magazine from reserves. It flows the magazine up to almost double, if not a little bit more than that. So with this, we're getting about 12, 13 in the magazine. And when you get this and some of our 4th column perks to proc, it absolutely juices those bosses with the spike grenades, Envious Assassin, and then our 4th perk for sure. That 4th perk in the 4th column is the bait and switch. Dealing damage with all equipped weapons within a short period of time gives the damage boost. So you do a little kinetic energy and then shoot this thing. You got 12 shots at that increased damage of 30%. So you stack this with other things that you got going on, and it absolutely juices those enemies. Boss spec as well as our spike grenades, you are getting upwards of like 75-80% increased damage of this thing. So it just eats those bosses and mini bosses. The second option you could go with is Frenzy right here. Definitely a slept on perk. It gets procced by just being in battle. Don't have to get defeats, don't gotta get hits with other weapons, anything like that. You just get that 15% damage. You get increased handling and reload as well just by being in combat. So a second option, definitely a little sleeper. Last but certainly not least, to pair with Repulsor Brace, you got the destabilizing rounds. Definitely if you got those two together, you're getting that overshield. Destabilizing is very good for that ad clear potential, as well as the void synergy, creating void breaches, stuff like that, orbs of power with your void subclass. But I personally think that you should definitely 5 out of 5 go with that spike grenade, Envious Assassin, and bait and switch for the PvE realm. Now when we move on to the PvP side of things, we can stack this out to a pretty high blast radius, which it is pretty solid inside of the Crucible. We got our typical blast brute, we got our Cataphract, also has a very good blast radius on it. So that's what we're trying to go for, as high as we can in that category, to get those enemies around the corners, stuff like that. Get enemies in groups as well. But we are using free hand grip as our mod on this. Gives us that increased accuracy, ready speed while firing from the hip. Definitely happens a decent amount for me, at least inside of the Crucible. As for masterwork, like I said, building this out heavy for the blast radius. I will go over those stats in a second here, but using this to get us up as high as possible with this GL. As for barrels, the first one I have is Volatile Launch. Gives us the most blast radius for our barrels here. Plus 15, we do get -5 to handling, -5 to velocity, which in my opinion doesn't make too big of a difference inside of the Crucible here, but that plus 15 does feel nice, giving us all the way at 85 with this grenade launcher. Your second option is kind of a jack of all trades, if you will. Perk right here with Linear Compensator gives us +5 to stability, velocity, and blast radius. So it's at 75 instead of 85 for blast radius, but we do got a little bit better velocity and stability with this perk. Now right here, as for our magazine, I think this is really the only one you should go for the PvP side of things, because of that 10 to blast radius with high explosive ordnance right here. We get 5 to velocity as well, but -2 to magazine, which when we're picking up heavy, we're only getting a couple shots anyways. So it really doesn't matter unless you're trying to go through like Mayhem, something like that, and get a bunch of grenades. But this is definitely the perk to use inside of the magazine. Two options for y'all inside of the third column for PvP. Impulse Amplifier is our first one, so we have massively increased projectile velocity and reload speed on this bad boy. So you can see we get 35% increase to that projectile velocity with 20 to our reload. So reload is at 60 on this bad boy, but that really doesn't matter because we're not reloading too often inside of the Crucible anyways. But that 35% increase to velocity is super nice. Gets to those enemies a little bit faster. Maybe you can get it behind a barricade before it gets up, something along those lines. Our other option is the old chain reaction right here. Each final blow creates a nice big old elemental explosion of void, so this helps inside of the PvP realm. We get 56 damage on those elemental explosions, so it's a good chunk of your health or shield, if you will, so it helps definitely in sixes. Lots of people playing that nice cheeky game, sitting behind barriers, sitting in rifts behind walls, so chain reaction can definitely help with that, but I think I would go impulse over chain. Fourth column, two options. Frenzy, first off, again, we get that 15% increase to damage. We get 100 handling, 100 reload speed for 7 seconds by being in battle, so it's nice to have that 100 handling for sure inside of the Crucible. Allows us to do a little bit more damage with this thing as well, so when we are hitting not directly on somebody, but there's a bunch of people, chain reaction frenzy, you can get a nice wipe of a whole squad with just a couple shots because of the damage as well as the blast radius with chain reaction. Now, our other option, which I really don't think is going to be that crazy to proc, because there are orbs, especially in sixes, being procced all the time, but we got explosive light. Now, the reason I chose this is because the next projectile's blast radius and damage is increased when we pick up those orbs of power when we have that heavy. So we're getting the blast radius to go all the way up to 100 when we have this procced, plus we get a 60% increase to that explosive damage. So if you can get explosive light to proc inside of the Crucible, it is absolutely destructive, but it is definitely a little harder to get proc, so I think that impulse amplifier with frenzy would be my number one option as a fun little one. You could go with destabilizing rounds if you're just trying to create chaos with volatility, but frenzy, explosive light should be your two options for sure. But this thing is amazing inside of both PvP, PvE, in my opinion. For the damage side, definitely a 5 out of 5 right now. It is absolutely juicing bosses overall. I would still put it at like a 4.75 for the PvE realm. Absolutely dapping up right now. And then inside of the Crucible, definitely up there with our better ones. So I would throw it up there at like a 4.3, 4.5 maybe out of 5, but it is a very fun weapon. Get yourself some of those shinies. No longer just a meme. This thing is actually juicing that damage, and it's very fun to use inside of the Crucible. So I appreciate all you guys for coming back to the channel, helping me out. Hitting that like and subscribe button means a lot to me, helps out the channel, so make sure to slap those out, slap that bell if you have not, so you don't miss out on any of these guides, builds, stuff like that. So again, I appreciate all you guys as always. We got Pantheon guide coming out tomorrow for y'all with those raid bosses doing 8 in a row. So again, I appreciate all you guys. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.